Good evening, friends. I welcome all of you to this webinar series which the Chamber has started. I hope you all will appreciate that Chamber has constantly making efforts to reach to its members wherever they are located through this webinar series. And I am very sure that this will be a very useful and it's a knowledge sharing technology through which we will be connected. Friends, today's topic is appeal before the CIT appeal, and I welcome all of you to this program, as well as I welcome the speaker also, Mr. Rahul Hakani, who will be taking this lecture, will be explaining us the provisions, because this CIT appeal is flavor of the day, since we all have dealt with the assessment proceedings, which has we have received the lot of assessment orders, which are high pitch assessments also, and it is then we have to now proceed with the filing of the appeals. So to deal with the various aspects of the appeal provisions, procedures, how to draft appeal, what are the care needs to be taken, and what one should look into, all these aspects will be explained by Mr. Rahul Hakani. And I wish all of you that it will be a worth learning experience for you. But at the end, I would also like to mention that please share your experience about the webinar with the Chamber, so that we will be able to improve ourselves on this program. Thank you.
Friends, I'll formally introduce Rahul Hakani. Mr. Rahul Hakani is a practicing advocate of Bombay High Court. He has completed his Bachelor of Law from Government Law College and has done his Masters from Mumbai University. He has also completed his Chartered Accountancy from ICAI. His areas of practice include direct taxes, other civil and commercial laws. He regularly appears before CIT appeal, ITAT, High Court and Supreme Court in income tax matters. He regularly contributes articles in various journals of CITC, AIFTP, etc. He has co-authored publications on FEMA, LLP, Black Money Act, interpretation of taxing statutes. He is currently the chairman of Allied Law Committee of Chamber of Tax Consultants. I would request the president to give a memento to Rahul Hakani as a token of our love and affection. And I'll hand over the mic to Rahul to take you forward on the Chamber's, on the Commissioner Appeals filing. Thank you.
Good evening, friends. This is a very different experience, and how technology has reversed the entire thing. One of the important aspects of public speaking was that a speaker should be able to engage his eyes with all the public. That is one of the principles of public speaking. However, the webinar has reversed the entire thing. Everybody can see the speaker, but the speaker can't see anybody. However, as the president of the chamber also pointed out, this enables us to have discussion with people who are not located in Mumbai, who are located in various places. In fact, one of my very old friends from college, he called me in the morning. He has also enrolled. His name is Mr. Sikka. And he called me in the morning and he told me that I will be joining you today. And I asked him, how? Like, are you in Mumbai? He said, no, I'm going to join you on the webinar. So, friends, this is a great technology and Chamber is making a good use of it. Of course, I am a lawyer, so I'm more used to talking or giving presentations while I'm standing. Of course, this will be a different experience. I hope all of you like it. When I started my tax practice, people used to often say that the success of the appeals before the tribunal as well as the High Court was very high as far as the assessees were concerned. That is, majority of the matters were won by the assessees before the ITAT and the High Court. On my inquiry whether that success ratio is also there with the Commissioner Appeals, the answer is obvious. It is only in exceptional cases that we find that the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeal would decide a matter in favor of the assessee. And in fact, I've come across discussions where people actually have come to a conclusion as to whether we require the CIT appeal. Why not have a direct appeal to the tribunal from the assessment order? These things have boggled me also a lot. But with my experience in the profession, I feel that CIT appeal is a very important forum. Now, the CIT appeal is the first appellate authority under the Income Tax Act. The moment the assessment order is passed, this is the first opportunity to challenge the assessment order. Whatever is said before the CIT appeals is not only relevant to the CIT appeal, but believe me, it goes a long way in deciding appeals even before the High Court. And in due course of my presentation, I will point out how. Now, when I say the first appellate opportunity, there are several facts which the assessee can bring to the light of the income tax proceedings before the CIT appeal. Now, often we've seen that the assessment orders are passed in a hurry. The assessing officer waits for a very long time. Ultimately, it is only in the month of December that he issues the show cause notices. He requires the assessee to file his replies within 3 to 4 days. And then ultimately there are cases where assessing officer relies on certain reasons to come to a conclusion which the assessee is not aware of. Or maybe cases where assessee, because of lack of time, is not able to give all the evidences which he could have otherwise produced before the assessing officer. Therefore, the appeal before CIT appeal, I say, is the best opportunity to regularize various lacunae which are pointed out in the assessment order. The conduct of proceedings before CIT appeal. By conduct of proceedings before CIT appeal, I mean the manner in which the appeal is dealt with by the professionals before the CIT appeal, irrespective of what is the ultimate outcome, has a massive impact on the outcome of the matter before the superior appellate authorities. And last, now the appeals are mandatory, required to be e-filed in certain cases. And when one goes through the e-filing form, they require you to file the application for condonation of delay, the affidavit, the additional evidences which you want to file, etc., which only point out that what is required is a meticulous preparation of the matter before you actually file an appeal to the CIT appeal. Of course, appeal to CIT appeal deals with section 246A, 248 to 251, rules 45, 46 and 46A. Now, after an assessment order is passed, of course, two options are available. One is to file an appeal to the CIT appeal or to file a revision petition to the CIT under 264. Appeal to the CIT appeal is the most common recourse. However, before CIT appeal, of course, the assessing officer cannot file an appeal. Now, generally, cases which are before the CIT appeal, or which now the appeals will be filed, would be against assessment orders passed under section 143.3, 143.3 read with section 147, 144, 154, penalty orders, TDS penalty, etc. Now, these assessment order, of course, they come with the demand notice and the penalty notice. Now, in high-pitched assessments, of course, in every assessment, but particularly in high-pitched assessments, where the pressure of recovery will be there. Assessee requires to file the appeal. He also requires to file the stay petition before the AO or the CIT appeal, as the case may be. He also, according to me, requires to file an application for early hearing before the Chief Commissioner of Income Tax. There is an internal circular whereby the power to grant early hearing has been given to the CCIT. So an appropriate application needs to be made to the CCIT, and then the CCIT will direct the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals to expedite the hearing. Irrespective of whether the appeal is ultimately expedited or not, this application is very important when it comes to deciding the stay petition. And therefore, in my respectful opinion, this application requires to be made. And last, with every demand notice, there is a penalty notice. Some of these penalty notices require you to appear before the assessing officer with your submissions before the date for appeal or the due date of filing the appeal has expired. So what exactly we need to do, or how do we attend to these penalty notices, is also an offshoot of the topic, which is the appeals before the CIT appeal. Now, as soon as we receive the assessment order from the assessee, the first thing which we need to do is to ascertain what is the date of receipt of the order or the date of receipt of the demand notice, because it is from this date that the period for filing the appeal starts or commences, and the time limit for filing the appeal, as we all know, is 30 days. So the moment you ascertain what is the date of the receipt of the order, what you come to know is the number of days you have to prepare the appeal. And I'll tell you, this aspect is very important when we are approaching or we are filing the appeal before the CIT appeal, as to the availability of the time for us to file the appeal. And this will determine as to what will ultimately enter your statement of facts and grounds of appeal. And therefore, ascertaining this date is of utmost importance. Now, once the date is ascertained, it is important that you read the assessment order, according to me, at least twice. And it becomes very important, and I'll just point out as to how to thereafter hair split the assessment order, so that no aspects are left out at the time of filing the appeal before the CIT appeals. And even if you are the person who has appeared before the assessing officer, still read the assessment order thoroughly. Don't go by presumptions as to what will form part of the assessment order. Now, as soon as you go through the assessment order, you must ask the assessee, or you must call for all the notices which have been issued during the course of the assessment proceedings. That is, the notices under 143.2, 142.1, and the show cause notices issued during assessment proceedings for a particular edition, and also the replies of the assessee. What this does is, suppose in a case where 143.2 is not issued, or there is some other procedural lacuna by the assessing officer, so that will be brought to light. So this is the thing which we do, is we call for all the notices from the assessee and also collate all the replies which have been filed along with this with respect to all the show cause notices. If an order is passed under 147 read with 143.3, that is pursuant to a reassessment proceedings, it is important that you call for the notice under section 148. This helps you determine first the date of the notice and also whether the sanction has been obtained for going ahead with the reopening. Because many times what is seen is that at the stage of assessment, these aspects are not looked into by the assessee or those who are representing the assessee. Then ask for the reply which was filed to the notice under 148, whether the assessee has stated that his original return should be treated and whether he has asked for the recorded reasons. Call for the recorded reasons, then objections to reopening, and also the order disposing objection. After collecting these details, examine all the aspects of reopening or reassessment proceedings as to whether they have complied section 148, 149, 151, etc. Also ask for the copy of the sanction. Now, if any of these details are not available with the assessee, it happens a lot of time that they don't have it or they have not asked for it at the time of assessment proceedings, then kindly take necessary action. That is, either tell the assessee to file a letter with the assessing officer asking for all these details. And if the assessing officer does not give so, then the best recourse would be to file an application under the Right to Information Act. But it is important that you have all these details before you start drafting your grounds of appeal and statement of facts. The next thing is that many of these assessments would have been pursuant to a survey or a search wherein the statements would have been recorded of the assessee or the director of the assessee, or during the course of assessment proceedings, the statement of the assessee would have been recorded. Now, it is often seen that these statements are not there with the assessee, or the copies of these statements are not given to the assessee, or the assessee has not been diligent enough to ask for the copies of these statements, and ultimately the assessing officer relies on these statements and makes the addition. So if these statements are not available, then ask the assessing officer to give the copy of these statements. Also, in a particular assessment, the AO could have relied on statement of third parties or third party evidences, copies of which may have not been furnished to you, or the assessee would have not asked for the copies. So call for those copies also from the assessing officer. A simple letter can be filed with the assessing officer asking for all these details, and that necessary charges could be paid. If the assessing officer does not give these details, then of course you can file an application under the Right to Information Act. Now, as I said in the beginning, that sometimes getting all these details take time, and the time limit or the due date for the appeal may be approaching. However, if you take the steps of filing letters with the AO for getting all these copies, at least the process has begun, and we can take general grounds relating to all these aspects. Because otherwise, if we procrastinate this, then these things ultimately pile up at the time of hearing, and then again we may not be able to get those details, and we may not be able to represent our case properly before the CIT appeals. The third thing is that many times the assessing officer relies on the order sheet notings, particularly for stating that on so and so date a particular aspect was inquired from the assessee or his representative, and that no reply has been filed, or a reply has been filed, or the assessee says that okay, this was something which I was not knowing. So in that case, it is important that you also apply for the order sheet notings which the AO could have relied upon in the assessment order. Now, assuming that you get all these details, then the next aspect to be seen in the assessment order is whether any addition has been made by the AO stating that the assessee has agreed for that addition. Then you have to find out from the assessee the veracity of the statement, whether it is true or whether it is false. If it is true, then what was the circumstances under which such addition has been agreed upon, and if still assessee wants to challenge that addition, then assessee has to make out a case to say that the addition was agreed upon under certain circumstances, say penalty would not be levied but penalty notice has been issued, or that he misunderstood the query from the assessing officer, or a case has to be made out. And therefore it is very important before the filing of the appeal that this aspect is looked into by the person who is drafting the appeal, because if this objection is taken at a later stage, then it may be stated that it's an afterthought, or it may be stated that since it was an agreed addition, the appeal on this ground cannot be entertained. The next thing to see in the assessment order is what I say is to hair split the various reasons on which a particular addition or disallowance is made. Now this is very important. For instance, suppose a show cause notice is given that, to give an example, that say in the case of a trust, certain application of income is to be disallowed on a legal ground. But when we receive the order, we find that that particular application has been disallowed not only on the ground mentioned in the show cause notice, but also on the ground that assessee had not proved, say, that it was for the objects of the trust or some other reason. Now it is important to bifurcate a particular addition into various reasons so that every reason can be challenged before the assessing officer, before the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals. Also, say on a particular reason on which the addition is made, which was not told to the assessee or his representative, then in that case you will have to collate evidences or you will have to file additional evidences before the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals. Therefore, it is very important that you hair split the various reasons on which a particular addition or disallowance is made. The next thing to do is to ascertain whether the reasons were explicitly or impliedly covered by the show cause notice. Now suppose, for instance, the show cause notice states that that the assessing officer intends to make the addition under section 68 of the Income Tax Act. Now the law is very clear that one has to prove three things, that is the identity, creditworthiness and the genuineness of the transaction. Now it will be difficult to say at a later stage that you did not bring out certain documents proving the creditworthiness because the assessing officer did not ask for it. Because in this case, the assessing officer in the show cause notice has impliedly asked for several details and the onus is on the assessee. In that case, how to bring those documents now on record would differ from a case where the reasons are explicitly not covered by the show cause notice. So this is what is to be next ascertained, because this will form the reason for in your application for filing the additional evidence. The next thing to be done is to ascertain whether any reasons for addition or disallowance not covered by the show cause notice require production of additional evidence, and also where additional evidence are required to meet the objections of the AO. If yes, then ascertain cogent reasons for not filing the same before the AO. So once we know the reasons on the basis of which a particular disallowance is made, and once we know whether those reasons were put to the assessee or not, then accordingly we can prepare evidences or documentary evidences for those reasons as well as for reasons which were told to the assessee may require filing of some additional evidences. So this is how we will be able to gather various evidences which are required to be put to the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals, which were not earlier filed before the assessing officer. Now, as I said, why it is important to see the date of the receipt of the order and the availability of time to file the appeal, because after doing this entire process, the question which will boggle is whether it is possible to arrange various evidences, that is the additional evidences, is it possible to arrange them before the expiry of period of limitation. The advantage of mentioning all these evidences and before filing of the appeal is that it gives a good defense against the argument of the department that certain additional evidences are an afterthought. Because at the very first instance, within 30 days of the passing of the assessment order, if you have filed these additional evidences, then their argument that these evidences could be an afterthought gets diluted. Therefore, of course, but this is subject to availability of time. One has to arrange for these additional evidences anyways. The next thing to ascertain is what would be the correct address of the assessee where notices are required to be served. So this, of course, you have to inquire from the assessee that what would be the correct address, because many times the address could have changed or something. So in which case there is a likelihood of the CIT appeals order being passed ex parte, and also we must make the assessee aware that as and when the address changes, we are required to intimate the Office of the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals so that the notices of hearing are sent to the right address. Now, once we come to the conclusion that a particular matter requires filing of certain additional evidences, it is important that you raise a ground of improper opportunity of hearing, because this ground, as I said, this is the first opportunity of raising grievance against the assessment order. So it is important that we raise this ground, as this ground will help us support our application for additional evidence, which we will file at a later stage. Also, in case of reopening, always take a general ground of reopening, because the law on reopening is very dynamic, and many times we may challenge certain aspects of reopening, but we may not challenge certain other aspects of reopening. So in case of a general ground of reopening, it always helps in the second appellate authority that, well, we have challenged the entire reopening and not only particular grounds of reopening, and therefore we should be permitted to argue any other ground pertaining to reopening as well. The last is, of course, you should research the case laws so that you know how strong or on a strong footing you are, because all these aspects will not only help you in filing appeal before the CIT appeal, but these also help you in pursuing your stay petition, as well as helps you in pursuing your reply to the penalty notices. Therefore, it is important that this entire exercise is done at the time of filing the grounds of appeal before the CIT appeal, and this exercise should not be delayed at a time when the hearing will come. The next, of course, after doing this entire exercise, we must also determine whether to file appeal or not on a particular ground. Now, it may, as we are aware, that the CIT appeal also has the power to enhance the assessment. So we should be very careful to choose whether to file an appeal on a particular ground or not. And also, once an appeal is filed, withdrawal of appeal is not automatic. It depends at the discretion of the CIT appeals. Therefore, if there is a chance of an enhancement, because a lot of times, say the assessing officer may have not computed the exemption properly, say under 54 or something, and there is a chance of it being enhanced, then it is better we don't challenge that ground before the CIT appeal. Now, if an appeal is not filed due to smallness of amount and the issue is recurring, it is, as a matter of practice, it is better if we intimate about the same to the AO, so that in subsequent years, at least the AO does not say that because you have accepted in the earlier year, I am going to make addition in this year. Though res judicata is not the law under the Income Tax Act, but still it may happen. So it's better when assessing officer confronts us with this, we can say that, well, at the very first occasion we had already intimated that we had not filed an appeal only on account of the smallness of the amount. Now we'll come to the grounds. Now, of course, under the e-filing, mentioning of the section is mandatory. That is how the form is. But otherwise also the grounds should mention the section. It should also mention the amount in dispute, and it should also have a prayer, that is, the so and so addition or the so and so disallowance should be deleted. The ground should be concise and precise. What aspect of a ground is challenged must be stated. Now, as I said, when we do the earlier exercise, we come to know what are the aspects to be challenged. And believe me, this is very important. Recently, in a case before the High Court, what ground the assessee had taken was that the AO had not recorded his dissatisfaction under section 14A. Now, the ground was that the AO has not recorded the dissatisfaction, and before the tribunal also it was that the CIT appeal failed to appreciate that no dissatisfaction was recorded by the AO. What the assessee actually meant was no objective satisfaction or dissatisfaction was recorded by the AO. But because the ground did not exactly state the grievance, both the authorities have stated, well, the assessing officer has used the word dissatisfied, so your ground does not survive. When the matter came up to the High Court also took this narrow interpretation. and ultimately the appeal was required to be withdrawn. And therefore, as I said, hair splitting of the reasons, then to challenge each of such reasons. Therefore, what aspect of a ground is challenged must be stated. So therefore, we must clearly state what, say, under 14A is the main ground and what are the various aspects or various findings or observations of the AO under 14A which are challenged should be clearly spelled out in the grounds of appeal. Now, ground should not contain the case laws. Of course, there is a rule under the income tax appellate tribunals which say that grounds have to be concise, precise, you don't make it argumentative, don't put the case laws. Similarly, I believe same circular is there for CIT appeal also under e-filing something. So in any event, that is how the grounds should be. It should be in 1 or 2 lines explain the argument of the assessee. Now it should not be a simpliciter ground that the learned AO erred in making a particular addition. In 1 or 2 lines, you should explain why did he err. What are the, so this is the art of drafting. You have to put it in 1 or 2 lines so that your ground doesn't become very long. It remains brief, it remains concise. At the same time, the point, when the authority reads the ground, he comes to know what exactly is the grievance of the assessee. Now, ground should be exhaustive. That is, as I said, you should challenge each and every observation of the assessing officer, so that additional ground is not required to be taken subsequently, as the same would be time consuming. Now, suppose you miss out on some ground, then ultimately you will have to file additional ground. Then that additional ground has to go for remand. And then it becomes a time consuming process. So it's important that you raise all the grounds at the time of filing the original appeal itself. Of course, unless there is a change in law and circumstances require you to raise additional ground, then it's a different thing. But it should not be raised just because at the time of filing the original appeal you missed out on something. Now in your appeal, in your grounds, it is better if you avoid the words like grossly erred. Because when the appellate authority reads this word grossly erred, it may antagonize it. So a normal, the learned assessing officer erred should be sufficient. It conveys the message rather than to make it more rhetoric. Also remember to take alternative plea. For instance, you have a main argument of bad debt, but you also want to raise an alternate plea of a business loss. So while you draft the grounds, in every ground, kindly apply your mind as to whether an alternative plea could be taken, and if yes, kindly raise it at the time of filing the appeal before the CIT appeals. Now we come to the drafting of statement of facts. Now statement of facts is very crucial. Firstly, because all the facts relating to your case are coming to light for the first time before the first appellate authority. And secondly, there is no system of filing statement of facts or requirement of filing statement of facts before the income tax appellate tribunal, which is the final fact finding authority. Therefore, whenever an appeal is heard by the ITAT or the High Court, they often point out whether you have raised this particular point in your statement of facts or not, or you have raised this particular point in your grounds of appeal before the CIT appeal or not. Because the moment you raise these points, it becomes incumbent upon the first appellate authority to give it finding on those points. And therefore, it is very important that the statement of facts are drafted very meticulously. Also, it is the first opportunity in appeal to state correct facts and a possible strong defense against any additional evidence being alleged as an afterthought. Now, in the statement of facts, you are required to state all the facts, even if those facts are not covered in the assessment order, but they are relevant to your appeal. State all the notices and replies, state all the notices which were given to you, including show cause notices and your replies, like a date-wise event. Also state your submissions with case laws to the point. Now, you don't have to give detailed submissions, but your submission in brief, and if there are certain case laws to the point, or of the jurisdictional High Court or jurisdictional ITAT, the same should be mentioned in the statement of facts. Now, a detailed statement of facts helps to contest ex parte order of the CIT appeal. Now, suppose the CIT appeal has to pass the order ex parte for some reason, say he rejects your adjournment. then at least he has the benefit of the statement, your detailed statement of facts, and he can consider them while filing the, or he has to consider them while deciding the appeal. Now state all the factual mistakes or errors and incorrect observations. Now all the factual mistakes, errors and incorrect observations in the assessment order should form part of your statement of facts, even if you have filed a rectification application under 154. Now if the additional evidence are ready before due date of filing of appeal, then make an application for admission of additional evidence under Rule 46A. Now under e-filing, this particular tab is already there, that whether you are relying on any additional evidence, and I believe the Rule 46A application can be attached. The application under Rule 46A firstly must state precisely what is the additional evidence you are filing, what is the reason for not filing the same before the lower authority. For instance, if the opportunity was not, or you are not confronted with a particular reason for addition for which you are filing the addition, then you have to mention it that this particular reason was never confronted and hence you never had an opportunity to file this evidence, and therefore the said evidence is filed just now. The application must also state how the additional evidence will change the color of the entire case. So there has to be an averment as to how this additional evidence will overturn the findings of the assessing officer. So the application under Rule 46A must clearly state what is the additional evidence, why you have not filed it before the lower authority, and how it will impact the merits of the case. Now, where the filing of appeal is delayed, you have to prepare an application for condonation of delay. Now, of course, the law is that you are not required to justify each and every day of delay, but it is important that when you are preparing an application for condonation of delay, try to ask the assessee for justification of each day of delay from the last day of filing of the appeal till the date of filing the appeal. I would also suggest that it's important that you keep a calendar in front of you and check it again and again, because we have a lot of holidays and it may so happen that because of those holidays the filing of the appeal could have been delayed. So it is very important that you keep the calendar in front of you. Also ascertain whether assessee has documentary evidence to back the reasons for delay. For instance, if the assessee says that he was not well and therefore he could not give instructions to the chartered accountant, or the person who was supposed to draft the appeals was not well, then it is important that the documentary evidence is collated to justify the reason for the delay. The next thing is to make an affidavit supporting the application for condonation of delay. We'll see as to what should be the constituents of a valid affidavit, but the application for condonation of delay has to be supported by an affidavit which will support your application for condonation of delay. Thereafter, also check that there is no error in the verification clause. For instance, somebody may write that I so and so the appellant, whereas that person would be a director of the appellant or managing director of the appellant. So kindly check the verification clause that it is properly signed, stamped, and whatever the procedure under the e-filing of the verification, that is proper. Of course, the next stage is to file the appeal. So after all this drafting or grounds of appeal, say you had sufficient time to file application for additional evidence, condonation of delay, etc., etc. The next stage is to file the appeal. Now, the moment you have filed the appeal, the things are not over. Then you have to deal with the stay and the penalty proceedings. So as far as penalty proceedings are concerned, for which you will have a date of hearing even before the due date of filing of the appeal, in that case, the first step according to me would be to file a letter with the AO to tell him to keep the penalty proceedings in abeyance as the appeal is filed or to be filed. Now in this letter it is very important that you mention that if the assessing officer wants to proceed with the penalty and he does not want to keep it in abeyance, then he should give you an opportunity to file a detailed reply. Now as I mentioned that if we go through the entire process of drafting of this appeal, then you would be well equipped to deal with the penalty also, because assessment and penalty are independent proceedings and you may be able to tell the assessing officer, well, these are the various evidences, these are the various grounds on which opportunity was not given to us, and if opportunity would have been given, ultimately the appeal would have been decided in our favor, or at least there is no case of concealment or furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. Also check the penalty notice to find out the nature of penalty sought to be levied. Now, one is to see in the assessment order whether the penalty is for inaccurate particulars or concealment. The next is to see the penalty notice. Now, recently the Supreme Court as well as other courts have held that it is incumbent upon the assessing officer to strike out the inaccurate particulars, or that is, he has to clearly mention in the notice as to what, under what head he is going to levy the penalty, whether it's for concealment or for furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. Now, of course, this is not a ground which, according to me, one should take before the assessing officer, because then it allows him to give you a proper show cause notice. But what is relevant is that if he does not strike out anything, and if nothing is mentioned in the assessment order, then assessee should not deal with either the concealment aspect or the inaccurate particular aspect, but simply request to drop the penalty proceedings on the ground that he has all the details and there is no case for penalty. Because if we address a particular point of, say, concealment, and then he levies penalty on concealment, then it can be argued that an opportunity was given to the assessee. However, when it comes to the CIT appeal, you can always take the ground that he had not mentioned whether it's for concealment or furnishing inaccurate particulars of income, and therefore you had no option but to simply request him to drop the penalty proceedings, and therefore now the entire penalty order is bad in law. Now file all the details filed in assessment proceedings as well as additional evidence, if any, in the penalty proceedings if the penalty proceedings are not kept in abeyance by the assessing officer. Now the next stage would be to deal with the stay petition. Now for that, the first thing, as soon as we file an appeal and we have complied with the entire procedure of collating various evidences, we are ready with our legal arguments, then nothing prevents us to file a letter with the Chief Commissioner of Income Tax, as I mentioned, to direct the Commissioner of Income Tax appeal to expedite the matter. Now, once we have filed this letter can always be annexed to the stay petition before the AO or the CIT appeal to convey that, well, assessee wants to pursue the appeal, assessee is ready with the matter and he's got a good case, and therefore he's already filed a letter with the Chief Commissioner of Income Tax appeals to expedite the matter. But of course, don't file this letter unless you are ready with the matter, because in case it's expedited and then you keep on asking for adjournments, then it may antagonize the CIT appeal, it may antagonize the authorities, and they may take further coercive actions to recover the amount from you. Also ascertain whether there is any provisional attachment order passed under 281B. Now many times what the officers do is that they pass a provisional attachment order maybe a week before passing the assessment order. The life of this provisional attachment is of 6 months. So as soon as the assessment order is passed, it operates as an automatic stay. So it operates as an automatic refusal of your stay petition, or it prevents you from filing a stay petition. In that case, one may refer to the Punjab and Haryana High Court, which states that once the assessment order is passed, the provisional attachment comes to an end on passing of the assessment order. So what the assessee can do is he can ask the AO, he can write a letter that, well, now the order is passed, kindly lift the provisional attachment. Otherwise, assessee may be constrained to approach the High Court under a writ petition to have the provisional attachment set aside. However, while you do so, and if you know that you are on a very strong footing, because High Court may also ask you, well, you deposit 15% or you deposit some amount. However, if you are on a strong footing on merits, if you file your applications with the CCIT for early hearing with the CIT appeal, then maybe the High Court will be inclined to quash the provisional attachment. The next thing is to decide whether to file the stay petition before the AO or CIT appeal. Now, a stay petition before the CIT appeal has an advantage in a sense that CIT appeal can stay the operation of the order. However, the assessing officer or the normal commissioner is not empowered to stay the operation of the order. However, it is very often seen that CIT appeals are not very quick in disposing of the stay petitions, and they rather suggest the assessee to file the stay petitions before the assessing officer and the normal commissioner. However, one may take a call and file the stay petition either before the CIT appeal or the assessing officer. One advantage could be that if the stakes are high and a stay petition is filed before CIT appeal, then you can always tell the AO that, well, my stay petition is filed, don't take any coercive action till that stay petition is disposed of. And if still the CIT appeal does not dispose of the stay petition and AO is hell-bent on taking the coercive action, you can ultimately approach the High Court, in which case the High Court may either direct the CIT appeal to decide the stay petition or direct the CIT appeal to dispose of the matter on merits. And till that time, the AO may be prevented from taking any coercive action of recovery. And therefore, as I stated, that to prepare the matter in its entirety at the time of filing appeal before the CIT appeal is very important, as it not only helps us at the time of filing appeal, but also helps us in replying to penalty notices as well as the stay petition. And therefore, the entire exercise, as I suggested, should be followed before filing the appeal. Now, whether you go before the AO or the CIT appeal, you have to draft a stay petition. Now, the stay petition should contain the facts and submissions of the case, that is, the merits of the case. Because the rule of stay is that, one, you have to show that prima facie you have a strong case on merits, and that there will be great prejudice, injury and hardship caused to you if the stay is not granted. Therefore, as I said, you have to be ready with all the facts and your submissions with case laws or merits to show that you have a strong prima facie case on merits. If there have been violation of principles of natural justice, that is, some additions have been made without giving you the show cause notice, etc., then stress on those violations of principles of natural justice. Also state that if that opportunity would have been given to you, you would have been able to justify the grounds taken by the assessing officer, and therefore also you have a strong prima facie case. Also, you can point out the past record of the assessee with the income tax department as to how the assessee has always cooperated with the department. The next you have to see to it is that you always raise a ground that your appeal is pending and your application for early hearing has been made. As I said, it is very important. So you state that the appeal is pending and therefore no coercive action should be taken under section 220 subsection 6. Also mention what is the difference between the returned income and the assessed income, because in a high-pitched assessment, the difference between the two will be very high. And there have been various decisions that when the returned assessed income is more than 2 times or 5 times of the returned income and an appeal has been filed, the proper course for the assessing officer is not to take any coercive action. In last, you should also justify the ground of hardship. Many times, people just write one sentence that great hardship will be caused. But one should explain as to how the hardship will be caused, whether it will cause hardship in working capital or the company does not have the funds, etc. So that hardship will have to be explained. And last, you should always include this particular averment in your stay petition, that in view of the above submissions, it is submitted that assessee has a good chance to succeed on merits. Further, if stay of demand is not granted, great prejudice and injury will be caused to the assessee. As I said, these are the important aspects which are to be put up in before the AO or the CIT appeal in this stay petition, because many times when the matter ultimately travels to the High Court will ask you whether you have made this averment, and if this averment is not there, they may not be inclined to entertain your stay petition. Now, of course, the appeal is filed, you have dealt with the stay and the penalty. Now, at the time of hearing of the appeal, it is important that you compile a paper book containing all the details filed before the AO. Now, see, whenever you are approaching the CIT appeal, as I pointed out, we know the rate of success. But however, we have to approach the CIT appeal from the point of view as to how the matter will be ultimately dealt with in the ITAT and the High Court. Therefore, it is very important now when the matter reaches the tribunal one has to give a verification of all the documents which you have filed before the lower authority, that is the AO and the CIT appeal. Now, many times when the matter comes to the tribunal, neither the assessee nor the representative really remember which documents are filed, which documents are not filed. And then the whole process of verification, and because if the verification before the tribunal is not correct, it ends up in prosecution. It can end up in prosecution. Therefore, if a proper paper book containing details filed before the AO is made, it will ultimately help in the tribunal. Now, if there are several case laws you are relying upon, it's important that you prepare a separate paper book of the case laws also. Now, when you draft the written submissions, it is important that you give reference of the page number in the paper book. Now, this exercise really reduces the work of the CIT appeal while he is deciding your appeal, because then he is immediately able to correlate the evidence with your submissions, and it will give him a feel-good factor rather than giving him the documents across the table, or to just give him a written submission without any reference to the documentary evidences in the paper book. Now, in case of additional ground, prepare now at the time of hearing, if you want to raise any additional ground, then prepare an application for raising such additional ground. The application must contain reason for not raising the ground earlier. Now, suppose there is a change in law and therefore you are raising, then mention that reason, or mention the reason why you were not able to raise the ground earlier. There should be an averment that it's a legal ground and necessary factual details are on record. And last, that the ground is a legal ground. So all these things, like whatever factual aspects required for deciding the legal ground, are already on record. So just point them out. So this will help the CIT appeal to easily go through the additional ground and admit it. In case of an additional evidence, suppose we have not filed the application at the time of filing the appeal and we are now filing it, then the same principles will apply. However, as far as the additional evidence is concerned, kindly prepare a separate paper book. So then you will have a separate paper book for those documents which are filed before assessing officer and documents which are now filed as additional evidence. If the additional evidence is admitted, the same are remanded to the assessing officer for his comments. Now, many times it so happens that we are not able to comprehend as to what exactly would satisfy the assessing officer, as to what exact documentary evidence the assessing officer would want to reach to a positive finding. So, though we have filed additional evidence, during remand proceedings, it would be a sound practice to write a letter to the AO stating that the matter has been remanded to him and that the assessee is willing and ready to submit any further evidence which are required by the assessing officer, or required to produce any further documents, as well as ready to represent before the AO. So suppose you file a whole bunch or you file a consumption statement, now assessing officer may not be able to understand what exactly you have filed. So if you write a letter to him and say that, well, you are ready to explain it to him, it will be better for the assessing officer to prepare his remand report. Now, once the remand report comes, I feel the best way to deal with the remand report is to give a para-wise reply to the findings in the remand report. After all this, kindly prepare a final written submission, giving cross-references to the paper book of the documents filed before AO, the additional evidences, case laws, etc. A final written submission based on the remand report and your reply to the remand report. Friends, I have just given a draft of the grounds of appeal. For instance, in the case of improper opportunity, one can always raise a simple ground that the learned assessing officer erred in not giving sufficient or proper opportunity of hearing, and hence order of the AO may be quashed. As I mentioned, this general ground may help you further in your applications for admitting the additional evidences. However, within every ground also you may have this ground. So in that case also raise it specifically. Suppose an addition is made under section 68, then you can always mention that the learned AO erred in making addition of rupees. So you mention the amount, you mention the section. Now what is this amount? So it's a loan. Then mention it is a loan from which party, so that all the facts are immediately before the appellate authority. Then kindly mention, as I told you, in one or two lines as to what exactly is your argument. So you can always say that the officer did not appreciate that you had proved the identity, creditworthiness of the lender and genuineness of the transaction by producing. So you have produced the confirmations, balance sheet, etc. So you can just mention in 2 lines what all you've produced. And then the last aspect is the prayer, that and hence the addition of so and so amount may be deleted. So all the aspects, the ground is concise, it contains the amount, contains the section, it contains the reason why you are disputing this addition, and it also contains the prayer that so and so addition because of your ground should be deleted. Last, always have this ground that the appellant craves leave to add, amend, delete, alter, substitute or any or all of the above grounds of appeal. So friends, these are the draft grounds of appeal, concise grounds of appeal without putting any case laws. As I had pointed out, when you give an affidavit, it should not be, it should be in a proper format, it should be notarized. Now, assessee must give at the time of giving the affidavit supporting your application for additional evidence. Assessee must give due consideration to the manner of drafting and filing affidavits. See, when we are filing anything, or we should think, we should put ourselves in the shoes of a judge. And I would say of a judge who would be, always doubting, or who would be very narrow-minded, or who would be very meticulous in asking every detail. So this will help us in drafting our affidavits and applications better. Rather than, going by the approach that, oh, the judges are very liberal and they will always allow us, even if we loosely draft a particular affidavit or an application. So, assessee must give due consideration to the manner of drafting and filing affidavits. The function of swearing on oath is different from the function of simple attestation of an instrument. So, of course, the affidavit is always on oath. It cannot be a simple attestation. There is a Mumbai tribunal which has laid down the important aspects of an affidavit in 144 ITD 195. So, it states that the affidavit must not be vague and general in nature. It should be to the point, sufficiently explaining the cause for delay and demonstrating the bona fides of the assessee. It must be divided into paragraphs, and each paragraph must be numbered consecutively, and as nearly as may be shall be confined to a distinct portion of the subject. Now the affidavit must state how much of it is based on knowledge and how much of it is based on belief, and grounds of belief must be stated. So there may be certain things which you know. So you can always say that this is based on your knowledge. Now certain, say for instance, a delay, a part of the delay is attributable to the illness of your chartered accountant, and if you are filing an affidavit, then of course you are believing what your chartered accountant has told you. So you should state that this is on the belief, and the grounds of belief must be stated. Affidavit must be properly endorsed by a notary, so it should be notarized regarding oath of affirmation before him by the execution of the affidavit. Now the place and date of administration of oath must be mentioned. Of course, the notary takes care of this. The word sworn before me must be mentioned by the notary on the affidavit. Executant must sign the affidavit before the notary. The notary must sign the affidavit, put official notary seal and stamp, mention his registration number and also the general register number on the affidavit. So while you file an affidavit, kindly go through this decision and accordingly draft the affidavit, so that suppose an officer who is very strict with the drafting is not able to point out any fault with your affidavit. Because if your application for condonation of delay is rejected, then as good as your entire appeal is dismissed. Now, while every effort must be made by the assessee to explain the delay with appropriate documentary evidence, there is a Kerala High Court which says that, which should be referred, wherein it has been held that if the court was satisfied that sufficient explanation had been given for condoning delay, then the affidavit could be accepted as evidence. An insistence of proof of what had been stated in the affidavit would only prolong litigation. So, of course, affidavit under the Indian Evidence Act is not an evidence. But believing it to be true, the courts will accept it and not ask for every documentary evidence of what is stated in the affidavit. The courts are not required to do that. On an entire reading of the affidavit, if the courts are satisfied that yes, there was a genuine reason for delay, the delay should be condoned. Now again, coming to the stay. Now there are few instructions, which is instruction number 1914. which says that the AO must pass speaking orders while disposing of the applications for stay of demand. So the moment AO just writes a one-line order of stay or just refers to the recent CBDT circular that you pay 15% and does not give reply to the various grounds raised by you, that is, that you have a good case on merits, that the assessed income is several times the returned income, that your appeal before the CIT appeal is pending, and that great hardship will be caused to you, it becomes a good case to challenge such a stay order before the principal CIT. Of course, the view that what should be the various aspects which should be covered in the order disposing of the stay petition has been stated by the Bombay High Court time and again, but particularly these three decisions which I have referred, Tata Toyo Radiators, KEC International and Mumbai Metropolitan Region, are important decisions raising various points. So the moment a stay order is passed, you can go through these three orders to find out as to how the order of the assessing officer disposing of the stay petition is not sustainable in law, and accordingly you can take those grounds before the principal CIT. There is another instruction 96 which has stated that collection of tax and dispute should be held in abeyance till the decision of the appeal. Now several times we see the officer stating that instruction number 1914 has diluted this instruction. However, courts in Seoul and others have held that of course 1914 does not supersede instruction number 96, and that the aspect that the appeal is pending before the CIT appeal is very relevant while the assessing officer disposes of the stay petition. Now recently there has been a office memorandum stating that if 15% of the demand is paid, then the assessing officer should grant the stay. However, that office memorandum also provides circumstances in which assessing officer may require you to pay more than 15% and circumstances in which you can ask for a 100% stay of the demand. So I believe if one wants to go for a 100% stay, then nothing much changes. You have to follow all the what I told you regarding the stay petition. You have to prepare it in detailed fashion. Of course, in Kerala High Court, in N. Rajan Nair has held that recovery proceedings may be stayed where the income determined on assessment is substantially greater than the returned income. This was followed by the Delhi High Court in Valvola and Cummins, and then it was argued that, well, because of instruction number 1914, these aspects are no longer required to be looked into. However, as I pointed out, the Delhi High Court in Seoul stated that the above decisions would hold good even after the instruction number 1914. So friends, what now we have seen up till now are the practical aspects which are to be borne in mind at the time of filing of the appeal before the CIT appeals. So these are the various practical aspects that you approach the appeal as if you are approaching the final hearing of the matter. This will help you, as I mentioned, in your stay petitions as well as in your penalty notices. So these are all the practical aspects. Now we'll just see few various situations and also what exactly is the appeal. Now, a right to appeal is not an inherent right, which means that the right to appeal has to be provided by the law. So for instance, the Income Tax Act provides for the right to appeal. So if that right is not provided, you can never file an appeal. Then the only recourse available is if any other option is given either in the Act or to approach the High Court by way of a writ petition. Now courts have held that as far as the provisions of right to appeal are concerned, they have to be construed liberally. That is, more push should be given to come to the conclusion that yes, this is a appealable order, rather than stating that this is not an appealable order. Now, as I said, the appeal before CIT appeal is provided under section 246A. Therefore, it is a statutory right created by the statute. That right is subject to limitations, say 30 days, and restrictions imposed by the statute. Now, no appeal lies unless it is provided by the statute. So, here the issue was whether an appeal can be filed against an order passed under 197(3). The Bombay High Court stated, well, Section 246A does not provide for it, and therefore you cannot file an appeal. The correct course is not to file the appeal. Now, the right to appeal is a substantive right and not merely a procedural right. Now, Section 246A gives an exhaustive list of various orders against which the appeal lies. It covers situations where one denies his liability to be assessed, say example below taxable limit, or the income is not taxable under 10, or deduction under Chapter 6, etc. Partial denial is also covered. Now, Section 246A uses the word any assessee or any deductor, any collector. So, the term any assessee has been held to be wide enough. It would cover the legal representatives of a deceased assessee. It would also cover persons who are beneficially entitled to the income in respect of which they are assessed through a trustee or agent or court of bonds. It would also include kartas and members of a HUF or partners of a firm, irrespective of whether such firm is in existence or disrupted, firm or HUF is in existence, disrupted or dissolved, in case of assessments made on the family or firm or themselves as individuals or HUF. So ultimately, if any person ultimately has to bear the brunt of tax, then he would have a right to file an appeal. It has also been held that after the merger of two companies, the amalgamating company can file an appeal against the assessment of the amalgamated company. In the Madras High Court, the High Court made an observation under Stamp Duty Act that person has locus standi as even he was aggrieved. Now, the words used under the Stamp Act is similar to the Income Tax Act. There also the word uses any person aggrieved. Now, it has been held by the High Court that even a third party has a right of appeal if as a result of an order he is saddled with a liability for any tax or other sum. These are few decisions. Now, of course, a person can file an appeal only if he is aggrieved by the order. So, for instance, we many times see that what happens in a hurried assessment is that the assessing officer will issue a notice at the last moment. Assessee feels, well, he is not able to reply to the notices, and so ultimately they will say, oh my God, we have to go through so many details now. Why doesn't the assessee agree certain additions, which he can then later on challenge before the CIT appeal, and then when ultimately the order is seen, the order mentions that the assessee has agreed upon for such a addition. I feel as a matter of sound practice, it is important that we advise the assessee that not to agree for any addition. Let the assessing officer decide it against the assessee, but not to agree for any addition. And if the assessment order mentions that it's an agreed addition, then before drafting the appeal, one must give due credence to the order sheet notings, because it would be only in the order sheet noting that the assessing officer could have taken the signature of the assessee or his representative, and the assessee or the representative may not recollect or may have under a mistaken belief agreed for the addition. So the law is very clear. If you have agreed for an addition, you cannot file an appeal against that ground, and even if you have filed an appeal, it would simply be dismissed on the ground that you have agreed for the addition and therefore you cannot be said to be aggrieved. So every assessee aggrieved by any of the orders mentioned has a right to prefer an appeal. However, the Bombay High Court in Ramesh Chandra has held that where an assessee has made a statement of facts, there can be no grievance if he is taxed on the basis of that statement. As there is no grievance, there can be no appeal. When an assessing officer states in the order that the assessee agreed for the addition, he cannot file an appeal unless he challenges the observation of the assessing officer by filing an affidavit. So the moment the assessment order says that assessee has agreed for an addition, inquire from the assessee, go through the order sheet noting. If you want to challenge, then file a proper affidavit. You can file a 150 for addition also before the assessing officer, stating that this particular observation of the assessing officer is either incorrect or such agreement was made under a mistaken belief, or several other reasons should be given. These are a few other case laws. Kashiram and Anil Kumar of Punjab and Haryana High Court as well, stating that if you have agreed for an addition, their appeal will not lie. Now, assessee should make application under 154 challenging the observation of the AO and should file an appeal specifically urging that he has not agreed for addition and same should be supported by an affidavit. Of course, the golden principle is that tax cannot be levied except by the authority of law. A Punjab and Haryana High Court has stated that even if there is no provision barring filing of appeal against an agreed addition, but ultimately the CIT appeal may have to dismiss it on the ground that the assessee has admitted to the addition. So of course, this is a very important aspect. We see several times that there are agreed additions. So kindly, firstly as a sound practice, intimate the assessee not to agree for any additions. Secondly, if they have agreed to under a mistaken belief or the observation of the assessing officer that there is an agreement is wrong, kindly raise it before the CIT appeal at the first opportunity in the statement of facts. Also take appropriate affidavit of the assessee to that effect and file it. However, if this thing is raised later on as an additional ground, etc., the same may not be allowed. Now, where assessee denies his liability to be assessed, it can be claimed for the first time before the CIT appeal. Denial to be assessed can be claimed at any stage, as has been held by the Guwahati and Delhi High Court. Now, even if the amount is included by the assessee in return of income, he can claim before CIT appeal that the said amount is not taxable or chargeable. So, suppose you are eligible for deduction, but you have not claimed it. Can you claim it first time before the CIT appeal? So, you can always claim it. I've given, these are the three decisions where they have stated that even if a particular amount is included by the assessee in the return of income, he can claim before the CIT appeal that the amount is not taxable, because ultimately under the Constitution of India, no tax can be recovered unless you are chargeable for it. Now, levy of interest under 234B and C is appealable on the ground that assessee denies his liability to be assessed. Now the section says that where the assessee objects to making of adjustment or any order under 143(3) or 144 or the amount of tax determined or the loss computed or to the status under which he is assessed, all these are cases in which an assessee can file an appeal before the CIT appeal. Now suppose we have filed a revision petition and that revision petition has been dismissed. Now there is a Madras High Court which says that you can file an appeal before the CIT appeal and along with an application for condonation of delay stating that you had taken another remedy and therefore there is a delay, and you can pursue the appeal. However, there is a contrary view of the Orissa High Court in 343 ITR 316. Now, as I had already stated that a certificate granted under 197. Now, section 248 provides for appeal by a person denying liability to deduct tax, that is for orders under 195. So, there is no specific appeal provided against an order passed under section 197. So, therefore, a writ petition would be the best recourse. Now, where an order has been passed giving effect to an appellate order, say the ITAT has remanded the matter, or in view of the CIT appeals order, an order giving effect has been passed by the assessing officer, and you are aggrieved by that order giving effect, then though it is not specifically provided, but these order giving effects are appealable, as has been held by the Gujarat High Court in 282 ITR 595, because ultimately that order deals with your assessment and the notice of demand would be always under 156. Therefore, they are challengeable orders. Bombay High Court has also stated so in 137 ITR 281. Of course, there is a Calcutta High Court. So, I believe somebody has joined us from Calcutta also, in ANZ Greenlays Bank, which has stated otherwise. Now, denial of interest under section 244A is an appealable order. Now there are cases where protective assessments are filed, and in the case of an assessee where a protective assessment is framed, he does not have to pay any tax. So whether he can file an appeal, the courts have held that yes, protective assessment orders are also appealable orders. Now certain other orders which are appealable are order giving effect, granting refund but not interest is appealable. Intimation under section 200A, which is dealing with 234E, that is also an appealable order. This decision can be found on ititonline.org. This is a recent decision, Gajanan Construction versus DCIT. Issue of jurisdiction of ITO based on the place of assessment cannot be validly raised. Now, order refusing to consider a delayed return, belated return of loss, and not allowing carry forward of loss is appealable as held by the Patna High Court. So, even though there is no tax liability, but it will be considered as a nil assessment, and therefore an appeal would be allowed before the CIT appeal. Now these are some of the orders which are not appealable before the CIT appeal, and the correct course would be to then go for a writ petition. Now form of appeal and limitation, as we saw, the rule 45 provides for e-filing as well as manual filing. Form 35 is the form, then grounds of appeal, statement of facts. Now they have to be submitted in duplicate and under e-filing as provided therein, along with the copy of the order. Notice of demand has to be in original. Now non-enclosure of notice of demand. Now suppose there is some, you have not enclosed a particular thing, then these are all technical irregularities. This may not result in ultimately dismissal of the appeal because this can always be regularized. Now the form of verification shall be signed by a person in accordance with the provisions of rule, that is by the person who is authorized to sign the return of income under 140. These are the appeal fees. They have not changed for at least now, I believe, 10 years since the time I have started my practice. From the very beginning, as Ashok is pointing out. Now, if the income is determined at a negative figure, then of course you have to pay the minimum fees. Penalty order, you have to pay the minimum fees. Now, in case there is a consolidated order, then you have to file separate appeals for each year. Now, the appeal is to be presented within 30 days. Where the appeal is under 248, that is against 195 order, then it has to be from the date of payment of tax. Appeal relates to assessment or penalty, date of service of notice of demand. It's not the order but the notice of demand. And in any other case, the date on which intimation of the order is served. Now there is a recent second proviso which has been added. In a case where a person goes for immunity from penalty under section 270A, and that ultimately the immunity is rejected, then that particular portion will be excluded while computing the period of limitation. Of course, this may not be relevant for the current assessments. Now, can an appeal be signed by an advocate or chartered accountant or authorized representative? Now, as per Rule 45, we saw the form of appeal verification shall be signed and verified by the person who is authorized to sign the return of income under section 140 of the Act. Thus, it can be inferred that only in case of an individual or a company which is not resident in India, the return can be signed by a person who holds a valid power of attorney which shall be attached to the return. However, there are divergent views on the issue as to whether a defect in signature would render the appeal a nullity. Now, the Calcutta High Court has held that absence of or defect in signature of the applicant is not fatal so as to render the appeal a nullity. And it is an irregularity which can be rectified and will be treated as having been rectified retrospectively. Whereas Allahabad High Court has taken a contrary view and held that where the signature on the appeal was that of an agent, the appeal filed was invalid. However, this would not prevent assessee from once again file an appeal along with an application for condonation of the delay, in which case a bona fide mistake like this would always be condoned. Now, of course, in following cases, it has been held that an appeal signed by an advocate or CA is valid. Bombay High Court, Gujarat High Court. Now we come to the delay in filing appeal. So section 249(3) empowers the CIT appeal to admit a belated appeal if sufficient cause for not presenting the same in time is shown. Now, as we saw, for this we have to make an application for condonation of delay along with affidavit stating the reason for delay should be filed. The Calcutta High Court in Charkhi Mica Mining has held that the limitation period commences on the date of receipt of notice of demand by the assessee and not from the date of receipt of assessment order. Usually they come together, but in case you have received only the assessment order and the notice of not the notice of demand, you can always take advantage of that. In Collector of Land Acquisition versus Katri, this is a landmark case where the Supreme Court has held that court should have pragmatic and liberal approach in admitting the appeal before the period of limitation. However, you will have certain authority, judges or quasi jury or who would be strict, rather than liberal. Like it would be like they would see it from the point of view whether the assessee was negligent, and there would always be some element of negligence when there is a delay. So therefore, courts have said that you have to take a pragmatic and liberal approach. And therefore, as I stated, one should try to justify each day of delay, though that may not be the legal requirement, because that will help you formulate a very strong application for condonation of delay. This would of course require you to sit with the assessee or the representative who has appeared before the lower authority or who was going to guide you for filing the appeals. And as I said, sit with the calendar, that is very important. Other case laws like Balakrishnan and State of Nagaland, which can be also referred to, and these case laws can always be mentioned in your application for condonation of delay, though they may not be required to be mentioned in your affidavit. Certain legal principles which are culled out from the various decisions is that sufficient cause must receive a liberal construction. The primary function of any quasi-judicial body is furtherance of administration of substantial justice. So a person should not be thrown out just because there is a delay. If justice should not be denied, pragmatic justice-oriented approach is required and not the technical detection of explanation of every day's delay. Length of delay is immaterial. It may be 1,000 days, it can be 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. If you are able to justify the delay, what is required is the justification of the delay. A litigation does not stand to benefit by resorting to delay, therefore a justice-oriented approach is required by courts. If what has to be seen is whether the explanation of the assessee smacks of malafide or whether there is a dilatory strategy or delay in filing the appeal was to be condoned. Now there will be, as I pointed out, some lapses, but that does not mean that the courts shut the door. Refusing to condone a delay can result in a meritorious matter being thrown out at the very threshold and cause of justice being defeated. So all these points which I have mentioned can always be put up in your application for condonation of delay, that it's a meritorious case and so much prejudice will be caused to you if the delay is not condoned. There is some technical problem.
That is, how do you take the, going to the last.
One day, I just go to the an automatic.
He's on this
This slide number,
Ah,
the 40th slide.
Yeah, yeah.
42.
Go to 40.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
It's
going a slide short.
and if there are any questions,
Sir, people are asking questions. So it is coming to the admin part. And then we will do it.
Start. I'll put it this way only and let's.
Yeah.
yeah.
This is okay.
This is okay.
Now, there are certain conditions precedent to filing of the appeal, That is, the appeal will not be admitted unless the tax is paid as per return of income. That is, the self-assessment tax is paid. Where no return of income is filed, paid an amount equal to the amount of advance tax payable. This is under section 249. The CIT appeal may, for any good and sufficient reason recorded in writing, exempt from payment of advance tax. Assessee having paid the unpaid amount of admitted tax before issuance of show cause notice, the requirement of section 249(4) stood fulfilled. Now, there is no time limit prescribed for payment of this self-assessment tax. Therefore, if it is paid before the notice of hearing, the CIT appeal will have to admit the appeal and hear the appeal. Section 249(4) cannot be read down to restrict to appeals against assessment only, and it will apply to penalty also. So, this condition will apply to penalty proceedings also. Suppose you have not gone in appeal in quantum, but in penalty you are going, then you have to pay these taxes, otherwise the appeals will not be admitted. Now, the tax does not include interest, and suppose after adjustment of earlier years refund etc., no tax is due, then in that case, this condition precedent will not have to be fulfilled by the assessees, and the appeal will be admitted, as held by the Punjab and Haryana High Court in Jagdish Raj Chauhan and Pramod Kumar Tan, that adjustment of tax is valid. In J.R. Chauhan versus CIT, that is Punjab and Haryana High Court, appeal against assessment of AOP without adjustment of tax paid by members in their individual assessments not entertained by the CIT for non-compliance of 249(4). Fresh appeal filed after adjustment of tax should have been considered as an application for revival of the earlier appeal. Order dismissing fresh appeal as time barred set aside, and CIT appeal directed to decide the appeal on merits. Now, we had already seen the procedure of grounds of appeal and statement of facts. Well, we've already seen this. Now, if there is any defect in appeal, the same can be rectified by an amendment. The assessee should be given an opportunity to rectify the defects. That is, procedural defect must be intimated to the appellant, and that appeal should not be dismissed on the grounds of such procedural defects. So, section 250 requires the CIT appeal to give a notice to the AO and the assessee fixing a day and place of hearing. Following shall have the right to be heard: the appellant in person or through his AR, the AO or his AR. Now, CIT appeal has the power to adjourn the hearing. Before disposing of the appeal, the CIT appeal has power to make further inquiry or may direct the AO to further inquire and report, that is, remand report. The CIT may allow to raise additional ground at the time of hearing. Now, the wordings used are at the time of hearing. I believe there was a query whether that the additional ground is not taken by the office of the CIT appeal, and that the person has been directed to raise it only at the time of hearing. Now, the section also says at the time of hearing. However, it is immaterial whether you file it before the date of hearing or you file it on the date of hearing, if he is satisfied that the omission of the ground was not willful or reasonable. Now, there are special exceptional attributes of jurisdiction of tax appeal. Now, the order of CIT appeal should be in writing and should state the points of determination, the decision thereon, and reason for the decision. It cannot be an unreasoned order, or it cannot be a simple confirmation of order of the assessing officer. The CIT appeal ought to deal with the various arguments which are raised by the assessee. The CIT appeal may, as far as possible, may hear and decide the appeal within a period of 1 year from the end of the financial year in which appeal is filed. The CIT appeal on disposal communicate a copy of the order to the AO and the assessee. Now, during the hearing, as we saw, assessee should file written submission paper book. The CIT appeal has the power to make further inquiries as he thinks fit. As we all know, CIT appeal's power at co-terminus with that of the assessing officer. The CIT appeal has to pass a speaking order dealing with each ground. Otherwise, the Supreme Court, this has been stated by the Supreme Court in CIT versus Chennaiappa, he cannot, even in case of an ex parte order, he cannot dispose of the appeal stating that nobody has appeared, so I am dismissing the appeal. He has to decide the appeal on merits, and therefore, as I pointed out, it is very important that you file a detailed statement of facts because many times the notices are not received, etc. The CIT appeal will have the benefit of your statement of facts. Now, of course, they cannot dispose of the appeals in limine, as now is also held by the Bombay High Court in CIT versus Prem Kumar Luthra. So, in case they dismiss the appeal in limine, you can immediately approach the tribunal, state that the order is illegal, and therefore the matter should be reheard by the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals. The additional evidence we saw, it is provided under Rule 46A. This is nothing but a codified rule of natural justice. It is to be filed in following circumstances: where AO has refused to admit evidence which ought to have admitted, or the appellant was prevented by sufficient cause from producing the evidence which he was called upon to produce by the AO. The appellant was prevented by sufficient cause from producing before the AO any evidence which is relevant to any ground of appeal. For instance, as we pointed out, no show cause notice is given. The AO has made the order without giving sufficient opportunity. For instance, the number of days given to you to file the evidence is very less, say 2 days or 3 days. Then these are the various grounds on which you will be permitted to file additional evidence under Rule 46A. We have already seen the important constituents under Rule 46A in the initial presentation. Now, no evidence shall be admitted unless CIT appeal records in writing the reason for its admission. The CIT appeal shall not take into account any evidence unless the AO has been allowed a reasonable opportunity to examine the evidence of a rebuttal of the additional evidence. Now, many times what happens is assessee files the additional evidence and CIT appeal may refuse to remand the matter and state that I will only consider it. Now, what happens in such cases is that if it is decided in your favor, the department may take a ground before the tribunal that the additional evidences were not shown to the assessing officer or were not remanded to the assessing officer for his comments, and that there is a violation of Rule 46A. In that case, the appeal is immediately sent back to the assessing officer or to the CIT appeals to give the assessing officer a reasonable opportunity to go through the additional evidence. Therefore, in such a situation, either the CIT appeal should call for these details on his own by recording it in the order sheet noting, which he can do, and if any evidence is submitted pursuant to CIT appeal calling for those details, then CIT appeal is not required to send those details to the assessing officer for remand report. But if he has not called for, and if you have filed an application of additional evidence, it should be insisted upon the CIT appeal to send it for remand report. Notwithstanding above, the CIT appeal has the power to direct the production of any document or the examination of any witness. The additional evidence has to be filed in duplicate, so that one copy will be for the CIT appeal and one copy will go to the assessing officer. So always when you are filing it, kindly carry 2 copies and not 1 copy. Ensure that CIT appeal serves 1 copy to the assessing officer. The CIT appeal has to give a copy of the remand report and further an opportunity to reply to the remand report. If the assessee is prevented by good, sufficient or reasonable cause or adequate time is not allowed for such fresh evidence can be placed before the appellate authority, the Commissioner of Appeals would not be justified in rejecting additional evidence produced before him. So suppose you do not fall within those clauses, but still, if the additional evidences go to the root of the matter and they are required to be looked into, in that case the Commissioner of Appeals should take a liberal approach and admit the additional evidences held by the Bombay High Court in Prabhavati Shah. As stated also during the remand proceedings, always write a letter to the AO that you are willing and ready to furnish any further details or appear before him to explain in the case. Now these are few cases where additional evidences have been admitted. Now in Poddar Swadeshi Udyog, it was held that the tribunal observed that the books of accounts were produced before the AO and the new details filed before CIT appeal were in continuation of the original evidence. So it was not necessary to give an opportunity to the AO. But all said and done, it is always better if the AO's comments are invited. Now subsection 5 of section 250 gives power to the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals to allow the appellant to raise additional ground. We saw if he is satisfied that the omission of that ground was not willful or unreasonable. In your application, you can always cite the Supreme Court judgment in the case of Jute Corporation of India Limited versus CIT. Now, as far as jurisdictional point is concerned, the same can be raised by the assessee at any point of time, as has been held by the Supreme Court. The assessee can raise a jurisdictional point before the tribunal also in respect of the reassessment proceedings, as it is a question of law which goes to the root of the matter. Now, in the case before the Bombay High Court in Inventors Industrial Corporation Limited, the issue of reopening was raised for the first time before the tribunal. The Bombay High Court stated that since it's a issue relating to the jurisdiction of the assessing officer to make an order, it can be raised at any stage of the matter. In CIT versus Madhu Patani, 18, additional ground challenging the assessment on the ground of limitation can be raised first time before the CIT appeal in appeal against the fresh assessment order passed on remand, even though it was not raised either before the assessing authority or the CIT appeal in the first round of the proceeding. So as I said, jurisdictional grounds of limitations can be raised at any point of the appellate proceedings. Now, can assessee make a claim for the first time before the appellate authorities? Now, the Bombay High Court in 154 ITR 54 has raised that if there was evidence or material on record, then only a claim made for the first time can be entertained by the CIT appeal. Now, there is also a circular of 1955 which states that it is also the duty of the assessing officer to correctly assess the income of the assessees. For instance, if assessee has failed to claim certain deduction which otherwise he is entitled under the law to claim, then the assessing officer are also bound to assist the assessee in claiming those deductions. Now, of course, there is a Supreme Court decision in Godse India Limited versus CIT, wherein it is held that if a revised computation or a letter is filed before the assessing officer making a fresh claim, then assessing officer does not have the power to entertain the same. However, the power to entertain a new claim is not taken away from the CIT appeal or the tribunal. That is, both the authorities can entertain a new claim which are raised before it for the first time. CIT appeal can in fact entertain a new claim even in the absence of a revised return, which has been held by the Mumbai Tribunal in APL India Private Limited. Now, these are certain case laws after the decision of the Supreme Court in Godse India, wherein it has been held that a fresh claim can be made before the first appellate authority or the tribunal, and that the decision of Godse Limited is only applicable to making fresh claims before the assessing officer. This includes Delhi High Court, Punjab Haryana High Court, Bombay High Court. Now we will come to the powers of the CIT appeal. Now a CIT under section 251, CIT appeal may confirm, reduce, enhance or annul the assessment. Now there is no power of setting aside or remanding the matter to the assessing officer. If the proceeding before the settlement commission has been abated, he may use the material and information produced before the settlement commission. In an appeal against an order imposing a penalty, he can confirm, cancel or vary either to reduce or enhance the penalty. So he can reduce the penalty, enhance the penalty. In any other case, he may pass such orders in the appeal as he thinks fit. So he has been given very wide powers, including the power to make enhancement. The filing of an appeal may lead to grave consequences of enhancement of assessment, and therefore, as I stated, after doing our entire exercise of research and collating details, assessee must take a call whether a particular ground requires or whether there is a scope for enhancement of the addition, and then accordingly decide whether to go for the appeal before CIT appeal or not. However, he cannot enhance an assessment or a penalty or reduce the amount of refund unless a reasonable opportunity is given to an assessee. So under section 251 subsection 2, if the CIT appeal wants to make an enhancement, he has to issue a show cause notice to the assessee that it is on these grounds that he wants to make an enhancement, and he should call for the reply from the assessee. He should consider that reply and then accordingly decide to go ahead with the enhancement or not. The explanation provides that CIT appeal may consider and decide any matter arising out of the proceeding, notwithstanding that such matter was not raised before the CIT appeal. The CIT appeal powers are very wide. The scope of his power is coterminous with that of the AO. He can do what AO can do and can also direct him to do what he has failed to do. This has been held by the Supreme Court way back in 53 ITR. However, he has no jurisdiction to assess a new source of income which is not disclosed either in the return of income or in the assessment order. Thus, it is not open to him to travel outside the record for finding out new source of income. It has been held by the Supreme Court in 66 ITR 443. For instance, if suppose the assessment order has been passed by making or by estimating sales and GP percentage, now can CIT appeal state that, well, assessee does not have sufficient source or has undisclosed income or investment or unexplained investment out of which he has made the purchase, and therefore he would like to enhance the income by taxing this new source of income, which is the unexplained investment. So the courts have said that, well, what the CIT appeal can enhance is only the source of income which has been dealt with by the assessing officer, and he cannot venture into a new source of income, because if the CIT appeal is permitted to do so, then the various other provisions of the Income Tax Act, that is the reopening under section 147 or the revision under section 263, would become OTOs. So this is the principle of enhancement, which has also been now confirmed by the full bench of the Delhi High Court in CIT versus Sardari Lal and Company, wherein it is held that the first appellate authority has no power to enhance the assessment by discovering a new source of income not considered by the AO in the order appealed against. Now, coming to the power of withdrawal, as I pointed out, assessee does not have the power to withdraw the appeal. Therefore, if there is some ground which the assessee later on discovers that there are chances of an enhancement, and then he feels that, oh, now I do not want to go to the CIT appeal, then in that case, of course, he may not appear, or he may write a letter to the CIT appeal that he does not want to press a particular ground, or that if that particular ground becomes infructuous, he may state so to the CIT appeal. However, if the CIT appeal is satisfied that no prejudice will be caused to the revenue, he may allow the withdrawal, as held by the Calcutta High Court. Now, as we already saw, new claim before CIT appeal can be made if all facts are available on record. No power to review except power of rectification under section 154. So if there are any factual mistakes in the order of the CIT appeal, assessee can always file a rectification application under 154 if there are any mistakes apparent on record. Now, of course, the powers extend to any matter arising out of the proceedings. The powers of the CIT appeal are wide enough to include the power to examine all matters covered by the assessment order and to correct the assessment. The powers of CIT appeal are coterminous with that of the assessing officer. These are few decisions to that effect. Now, the jurisdiction of the appellate authority under section 251 is strictly conformed to the assessment order of the particular year under appeal. Now, CIT appeal cannot give directions for the assessment years which are not before the CIT appeal. Similarly, CIT appeal can't give directions relating to a third party, or that a particular addition should be made in the case of a third party. Such a decision would not be binding on the assessing officer. That would be the implication of that the CIT appeal can't give directions relating to another assessment year or relating to a third party. Now, we've already seen the power to stay the recovery proceedings. Now, the CIT appeal, as I pointed out, has a power to not only stay the demand but also to stay the operation of the order. So, if the order is stayed, then automatically the demand is stayed. This power is not there with the assessing officer or the principal CIT. Recently, the Bombay High Court in Gera Realty Estates has held that the CIT appeal has the power to stay the proceedings. However, as I mentioned earlier, one has to take a call whether to go before the CIT appeal for stay petition or to go before the AO and the principal CIT. Now, of course, these are various decisions which have held that the CIT appeal has the inherent power to entertain stay proceedings. Well, of course, this comes to the end of my presentation on the CIT appeal. We've seen the entire presentation in two parts. The first part, I wanted to highlight the practical aspects while we are about to draft the appeal, and then, of course, I took you to the various legal propositions on the appeals before the CIT appeals. There are a few queries which have come. Of course, I am not very well versed with the e-filing aspects. So the convener Ashok, he has agreed to deal with those aspects. However, aspects which are not dealing with the e-filing, I will be dealing with them.
Ankit Shah has raised a query.
Rahul sir,
Yeah.
read the name and read the question and then.
Okay. I've been suggested to read the name of the person who has raised the query. So the first query is by Ankit Shah. His query is, if my facts are strong enough, do I need to quote case laws to support it? In the grounds, firstly, you don't need to quote a case law for a fact. You have to quote a case law for a legal proposition. That is what is important is the ratio of a decision. Now, don't raise the case laws in the grounds of appeal, because that may really irk the CIT appeal and he may tell you to file revised grounds of appeal, which may end up ultimately delaying the decision on your appeal. However, as I pointed out, if the case law is to the point, or if it is of a jurisdictional tribunal or high court, or there is no other contrary decision of any other high court or of the jurisdictional high court, then in that case, kindly raise those case laws. You can mention the case law and in one or two lines the ratio laid down by that case law in the statement of facts. The second question is by Akshay Gowda. His question is, what section should be quoted in the ground of appeal relating to violation of natural justice? Or some general ground. Now, as far as e-filing of appeal is concerned, I believe it is mandatory to mention the section.
You can write statement attached and not mention it and attach the statement because that creates service.
Ashok is mentioning that we can attach the statement and mention their statement attached. However, if you want to mention the section, then if the general ground is pertaining to say reopening, you can always mention section 147. If it is relating to violation of natural justice, for which there is no specific section, if that violation of natural justice is relating to a particular ground, say under 68, etc., then you can mention that section. However, if it is general, I believe you can mention section 246A itself. The third question is by Mr. Girish Shah. His question is, in a case where notice of demand is received first,
Finish. Continue.
if in case where a notice of demand is received first and then assessment order, 30 days from which day should be considered? The law is very clear, 30 days has to be from the date of receipt of the notice of demand. But I've never come across such a,
It is
it has happened, okay. So in case because of this there is some delay in filing of the appeal, the same would be a reasonable cause for condoning the delay. The next question is by Akshay Gowda. His query is, can the CIT appeal take a fresh stand during appeal? For example, where the AO has accepted that the transaction is capital gains and such decision is not part of appeal. Can the CIT appeal hold the transaction as business instead of capital gains? Now, according to me, as far as this transaction is concerned, it was before the assessing officer. It cannot be called as a new source of income. And as the powers of CIT appeal are coterminous with the AO, and the explanation also states that he can deal with all the proceedings which are before the AO, he can though it is not a subject matter of appeal before CIT appeal, as that is not the requirement for CIT appeal, which is the requirement for ITAT, he can do it, and therefore when you file the appeal, you should always take this possibility into account. But if it results into enhancement, he will have to give you a notice of hearing, wherein you can again justify that, well, what has been assessed as capital gain is correct and not, it cannot be assessed as business income.
Ankit Shah. Whether the assessee should. Ankit Shah. Ankit Shah.
Ankit. The next query is by Mr. Ankit Shah. Whether an assessee should file an appeal before the CIT appeal or prefer filing before DRP. Now, this is a matter, I believe, of personal experience and personal comfort. A lot of people are not comfortable with the DRP nowadays. So, however, one has to take a call. It is not that one is better than the other. But, of course, the DRP is more suitable to deal with issues of international taxation than the CIT appeal. Secondly, you have an automatic stay of the demand once you go to the DRP, and the adjudication is faster, and then from DRP you can go directly to the tribunal against the assessment order. So as far as demand is concerned, going to the DRP is more advantageous.
No, these are the queries.
That is because
Because of the slide.
slide which we want.
The last one is another.
Ruchir Shukla.
Ruchir Shukla.
Yeah, the last query is by Mr. Ruchir Shukla. His query is that he is eager to understand e-filing procedure. So I'll request the convener of the Direct Tax Committee, Mr. Ashok, to explain us in 5 minutes the various intricacies of the e-filing of the appeal.
With regard to e-filing of appeals, it is now compulsory to make e-file all appeals. If you've not e-filed an appeal and you've put physical appeal in a few cases and they've accepted it, it is preferable that you file the e-file appeal even if it is delayed, and then go for a condonation of delay. The procedure is you should first draft the e-file, the appeal in the normal form, the grounds of appeal, facts of the case, take the SSE's signature. There are grounds of appeal can be put up individually and sections have to be mentioned, but to avoid doing a long process, you could actually write a statement, attach the grounds of appeal and facts of the case, because in the facts of the case there is limitation of number of words. So what one could do is attach the statement of facts in PDF, and then to avoid typing the entire thing, it could be attached as a facts of the case. There is also this issue where you have in e-filing where you don't have a DSC or you don't have an Aadhaar card on e-filing, e-banking facility, then it becomes difficult, but because e-filing does not happen. Now in a senior citizen's case or something like that, in that case what can be done is you file the physical appeal with the CIT appeal with a letter saying that I'm not able to do the e-filing because of these reasons, and afterwards you take up the process and get a digital signature and file it, and then apply for condonation. Generally those condonation of delay would be allowed. So that would solve that problem of not having a DSC or online account, or not even having an Aadhaar card. Generally, if you are filing a return online, then you would have one of these options. If you are not filing online return or it's a physical return, there could be this issue about not having these documents. You need to attach the e-filing. Generally, if you go to file the appeal physically now, they expect you to give the acknowledgement of Form 35 find online. So you could take a printout and attach it. Once you've e-filed an appeal, there is no procedure given that you should physically file an appeal, but it would be preferable so that you have an acknowledgement of the e-filed this thing. Though it is available online, you should physically file with the commissioner appeal, because if you go for stay or you want to go for early hearing, those papers would be referred to by the CIT appeal, because generally they might not have those records immediately available with them. Yes. Now, yeah, there is one query with regard to which Rahul will address. Appeal with CIT in Form 35 online. Method of e-verify. Yeah, same. Yeah. Mr. Deepak Shah has raised a query with regard to e-filing. Please clarify following. For filing appeal, CIT appeal in Form 35 online. Method to e-verify Form 35 for senior citizens for whom e-filing. Not having DSC, Aadhaar card or this thing. I think I've answered this. I've answered this in my initial this thing. So that takes care of it. As per Form 35 statement of fact should, I've answered that also. If you have a query, if you have facts of the case which are more than 1000 characters, then the easier way is to attach it and say as per statement attached, so that you don't have to type the entire thing. Generally, in majority of our appeals, we are doing that. We are attaching the grounds of appeal and facts of the case, so that you don't have to mention each section each time you give a grounds of appeal, or you have facts of the case which are very long. With regard to additional evidence, there could be sometimes a problem because they expect you to attach the additional evidence when you say yes. Otherwise, the appeal does not go through. So what you could do is you could say additional evidence, say yes, and give a list of additional evidences which you want to attach, and then file it physically with the CIT appeal saying that that particular additional evidence being voluminous could not have been attached, which will give you a few days to file physically those additional evidences. Otherwise, the time period provided is only 30 days. There could be a CIT appeal who would take a stand that since online appeal you have said no to additional evidence, I might not admit it. However, there are case laws which say that technicalities should not come into the way of admitting such evidence. But to avoid this complication, one could say yes, give a list of additional evidences which it is going to file as an attachment, and then file the evidences in physical form after a few days with CIT appeal. Yeah. Now to Rahul. Yeah. Any other query? Yeah, there is one. How to e-file the in case of the SSE, Naresh. Right. This is for you. This is.
Yes. The next query is by Mr. Naren Madlani. The query is, in case if the assessee has been issued a show cause notice and in reply to the same some facts have been stated, later the AO passes an order without asking for any further documentary evidence which could have been provided, can this be considered to be a violation of natural justice? Now, I had also explained this, that one has to see whether the AO has impliedly asked certain things in the show cause notice. For instance, if we ask you why addition cannot be made under section 68, then the onus is on you to provide the additional evidence, to provide the necessary documentary evidence to prove the identity, creditworthiness and the genuineness. If you don't provide them, and if the assessing officer writes in the order that you have not provided so and so document, it would be difficult to raise an argument that no opportunity was given to you. However, you can always file them as an additional evidence and give a justification as to why you were unable to file the same before the lower authority. In that way, you can draft your application for additional evidence and submit the same. I believe we have done with our today's presentation and all the queries. I thank all of you who joined us on the webinar. It has been a good experience for me also. It's been the first time on a webinar.
The pleasant task of giving a vote of thanks to Rahul. You'll all agree that he's taken us through the factual presentation with all the practical aspects of how to file a CIT appeal, and then going ahead as to what are the various powers of CIT appeal and the additional evidence, the case laws and the methodology which his vast experience he shared with us. I thank him for it. And I request all of you for coming to the webinar, and if you have any specific suggestions, please mail it to CITC so that we can improve on our presentations. Thank you.